welcome back to another Acura CL video. Today we're going to be replacing the auto tensioner that runs the alternator and that belt, the subsequent belt for it. What's interesting is that if you go to order this right now, you'll get it's on back order. I ordered it through a couple of different websites. So what we're actually going to do is, one, take a look at the auto tensioner, what has actually failed there. And then come up with some ideas where if you wanted to retain the factory OEM auto tensioner components, how you go about doing that with what is available. The other thing is that I purchased another auto tensioner, Gates auto tensioner, so that if for some reason I'm not able to utilize the OEM component, I can still keep the car running. I'll show you what failed on the Acura CL as well as what another common component of failure is when it comes to the auto tensioner. I do get questions, or I have gotten questions in the past of like, how do you get the belt off, because it is kind of tight up against the frame of the vehicle. You can't get a traditional 14 mil socket in there and put like a wrench on it. It's a little convoluted how you get there, but I'm going to do it with a Harbor Freight auto tensioner release wrench, and I'll show you how easy it is. It's really not that complicated. We'll go over that, and then we'll kind of piece it back together and show you how it's all done. Not a complicated process by any means, but I just wanted to show it because it's not something you can get right now from Acura, although I'm sure you could probably find some sort of substitute that is similar, but the actual part number itself is not available. So let's go ahead and dig into that and get this going. Okay, the first part that you want to start with is your tensioner release. Now, this is the part where some people have stated in the past that they had a hard time getting the belt actually off. Now, it is up against the frame rail here, and you can't get a traditional wrench into that spot and then kind of get enough leverage on that. You got a couple hoses in the way, some electrical connections, and you want to just be mindful of those as well. So you don't want to go in there and just start wrenching on things. This is the Harbor Freight version of the tensioner release, and what I've done here is used what they call, I believe this is called a crowfoot socket, and this is a 14 mil. Now basically what you do here is you thread it down in there at an angle where you can then lift up. So if I was to come in here right now, I'm in between the alternator cable and the AC line, and I'm basically just looking for that bolt that protrudes out on the auto tensioner, so you can hear that engage. And now I'm just going to go like this and extend that all the way back, and now I can slip off that belt. And so there it is, it's off the alternator, and now I just have to get it off the crank pulley, which is not that difficult to do if you can see what you're doing. And then you just pull up on it, and there you go. That's how you get the belt out as easily as anything that you could do normally. So not complicated, but I can see how it kind of gets confusing because you can't get a traditional wrench into that spot. So you definitely have to have that auto tensioner belt. There we go, and now it's off. So where we're at right now is that we've got the dipstick pulled out, which is a 10 millimeter bolt, just one that holds it onto the bracket. You can loosen the top bolt on the tensioner without jacking the car up, but you do have to jack the car up to get to the bottom bolt on the auto tensioner. The 10 millimeter socket on both sides of it, it's a top and a bottom. On the main part that holds it on, there's a through bolt that goes through the center of the auto tensioner, which I'll show once I take the tensioner off. But just so you know, you do have to remove the plastic shielding on the passenger side wheel well, and just enough that you can drop it down so that you can get to the crank pulley. The bolt that you're looking for on the bottom side of it is just adjacent to the crank pulley on the right hand side of it. So once I get this out, I'll show you in detail. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the OEM auto tensioner on this. So what I'm doing here is clamping the two bolts in that hold this into the engine onto my vise here. The idea is that I'll be able to then put a socket on this to go ahead and remove this. Now this is likely going to be reverse thread just because of the way that the belt spins. If it was reverse thread, then it would tighten as it spins. If not, it would basically undo itself. The tensioner itself is still good here. What the issue is the bearing. I can feel that there's ever so much play within that bearing. So when the car starts, you actually get this squealing noise. Not like high pitch, but you know, you get a little ee, and then as it warms up, it goes and dissipates away. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and remove this, take a look at the bearing itself, determine whether we want to use the OEM one or if we want to just scrap this whole thing and go with a new tensioner. So this is a 14. Just for reference, it is a 10 and a 10 and an 8 mil there in the center to get this off. Okay, so that will likely not move. We went ahead and broke that loose, and it is reverse thread as anticipated. So you want to set your ratchet to on, and just remove this. Now this is a factory OEM one. It might not be the original, but it's definitely the factory one. So it's actually shaft play here. So the inner race has likely been worn away to a point. The bearing itself might be still good with the bearing components, but it's actually shaft play that is going on here. So we will have to replace this. Now this is an available part currently from Acura, or you could press the bearing out and reuse the pulley. Since it is a press-in bearing, it does have the capability of being removed and then reinserted. So if you're looking at doing that, the bearing markings on this, let's see here, it is a J37 FE, so J37FE, and what appears to be 263. So you could probably match that up pretty easily with a bearing. Now, you definitely want to make sure that you get the right bearing for this. Don't just size it by diameter because bearings go by spin rate and RPM handlage. So if you got the wrong one, then you'd be likely replacing this soon. So that you could just spec from the OEM catalog and get a replacement if you wanted to. But we're going to take a look at the new componentry and see if we can just put a new fitting on this. Okay, so here's our gates, and this is what I can only assume to be
likely at gates as well. The imprints are almost the same on the back side of it. There's slightly different revisioning probably between the two, just because I can see that there are tabs here that aren't present here. Otherwise, it looks very similar in its casting, as well as the fact that this says it was made in Canada. This was made in Canada as well. So what we're going to do is go ahead and remove this and see if we want to use this OEM tensioner or not. But I at least want to take a look at the bearing and see if it is of the same quality. So we will go ahead and place this back into the vise using the OEM bracketry. There is definitely a difference within the hardware components of it. Different washer. There is still play between the two, which is very interesting. So it does require some fitting, so it actually may be the bearing itself is bad in here. Definitely different. It has different markings on the bearing. The markings on this bearing are 6203-88-21E. This one's marked as a China bearing, which is interesting. Definitely don't know how long that will last in comparison to this. This definitely looks like a higher quality bearing. But what we can do is we can replace this unit. We'll actually keep it the same. And then we will likely just order a replacement bearing for the OEM auto tensioner. That way we can keep everything the same. Go ahead and put this back. Looks like it was actually facing likely this way. We'll go ahead and torque check this now and make sure that it's torqued to spec. The torque spec on this bolt, at least for the OEM tensioner, should be 17 pounds. Go ahead and make sure we're zeroed out here. So let's actually go ahead and release this. It's over 17 right now. 17 to me seems a little loose, but bearings are bearings, so we definitely want to go with what is recommended. So I definitely don't like the way this is sitting. Basically, it's just pressing on the bearing itself as opposed to the surround, much like the OEM one. So I think I'm going to play around with this a little bit and then see what I like as far as fitting. I definitely like the OEM washer as opposed to the supplied, what looks like to be a hardware store washer on this. Not so specific about the bolt itself, obviously. This one has seen better days anyways. We will use, obviously, OEM bracketry to put it, or fasteners to put it back on. But it's very interesting that this washer gives it more support when you're placing it. So there's actually less play now that this washer is on, as opposed to when this washer was being used. So that's interesting to note. I think what we'll do is we'll find the OEM pulley system, and we will try to rebuild this in a future video. The tensioner itself still seems fine, as you realize that the tensioner is basically just a spring within there, so unless the spring collapses or fails, you're likely going to be able to reuse this component of the auto tensioner, unless there is some sort of significant wear that occurs also within this. But like I said, I believe, just even looking at these two side by side, that there's so many similarities to them. I would not be surprised if this is actually a remarked plate on top of a Gates auto tensioner. So I know Acura has used Gates, specifically belts from Gates in the past. So I'm not actually too concerned about using this, but I'm more concerned about the quality of the bearing itself here. So now it's time to go ahead and reinstall this. Okay, so we've got the auto tensioner back in. We got a new Gates belt on, and basically installation was reverse of removal. That kind of sounds cliche, but it is pretty easy. Once you get everything apart, everything goes back together pretty easily. So next thing to do is just to test it out, take it on a test drive. Okay, so we finally got the CL started here. The most difficult thing about this job, I'll say, is putting back the 10mm that holds on that dipstick. Other than that, pretty simple, pretty straightforward, just a couple bolts back on. You can hear that the car is running really silently in its drive belts, so nothing adverse there using this Gates so far. I'm going to take it out for a spin and see how it does, but I think that'll probably conclude this video.